Everyone was looking at is the reaction from Ghislaine Maxwell. It was hard to see if she was showing any real emotion because there was a mask over her face. But I can tell you within moments of hearing guilty on count 1, not guilty on count 2, and guilty on those other 4 counts, she sort of took a deep breath and looked as though she was pouring herself some water. Again, this is a big day for a number of women, not just the 4 that were the center of this trial, but the dozens of women who accused Jeffrey Epstein of sexual abuse and never got to see his case go to trial. Remember, he was found dead in his jail cell back in 2019, and all of a sudden, the focus turned to Ghislaine Maxwell, her involvement, what she knew, what she didn't know. 4 women at the center of this trial. Again, as you mentioned, she's found guilty on every single count except for count 2, which has to do with the enticement of an individual under the age of 17, specifically as it pertains to Jane in this case, to travel with intent to engage in illegal sexual activity. But a lot of work, a lot of months, and even years when you go back to sort of this coming to light, when you look at what happened with Jeffrey Epstein. Ghislaine Maxwell always maintaining her innocence, but in this case, the jurors believed the women.
And Jessica, let's talk about the actual counts that Maxwell was convicted of. Why was it that she wasn't found guilty of that second count?
Well, only the jury knows for sure why they believe that the prosecutors didn't prove that case. But there was some indication that they might be going that way on count number 2, if my memory is serving correctly, based in part on some of the questions they asked, based on some of the transcript they asked for. I think they asked one question about basically what type of behavior would satisfy count 2. And there was some question, well, does that indicate that they're waffling on all the counts, or are they just going count by count in this case? I will say that I think it actually shows the jury made a very careful decision in this case. Look, there's no 2 ways about it. It's absolutely a repudiation of the defense's tactic here. The defense, frankly, I think trying to blame the victims, saying their memories were faulty, saying that they were really motivated by money, saying that the prosecution in this case was really just trying to go after Epstein, but he was dead, so Ghislaine Maxwell was the only person standing to hold responsible. So 5 out of 6 counts. Really, it is a jury finding overwhelmingly that the prosecution proved its case. And the fact that it wasn't on all counts, to your question, I think really does show the jury took this not as a whole, but in isolation, count by count, piece of evidence by piece of evidence, applying those pieces of evidence to the jury instructions, to the law, to see if each one in isolation was satisfied.
And so, Jericho, we just heard from Jessica, who'd mentioned the questions that the jury had along the way. They clearly took their time with their deliberation. It took about a week or so. What were some of the things that they asked for before today?
Mainly the transcripts. They were asking to reread the transcripts from FBI, from other people who testified on the defense side. And to Jessica's point, whenever it takes a little bit longer than expected, and I don't know if there was really an expectation, but we're talking a number of days, hours of deliberating, knowing also that there's an Omicron variant that is spreading like wildfire, knowing that New Year's Eve is a couple days away, and this judge making it clear that they would be here through all of that so that they could reach a decision in this case. It's really years, like I said, in the making, but going back to your original question, they continue to ask for transcripts, they continue to ask questions, and having covered cases very similar to this involving sexual abuse and things that date back, 10, 15, 20 years ago, I think it's really, really important. I think these jurors took their jobs very seriously, as the judge noted, thanking them for their service at the end of this, because it is a big burden. You're talking about someone's life here, and Ghislaine Maxwell was facing up to 70 years on all the counts, but it's our understanding that she faces up to at least 65 years in prison. We'll learn more about that as this goes on, but as of right now, the big story, Ghislaine Maxwell found guilty on 5 of those 6 counts.
And Jessica, what comes next in all of this? What does the sentencing look like? Jerica talked about those 65 years that Maxwell could potentially face.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think maybe even up to 70 in this case, based on the counts. So in this case, the guilt phase obviously is over, at least on the trial court level. And the next phase will be sentencing. So the prosecution will come forward with a sentencing memo. The defense will say, well, look, we think there's some mitigating factors here. And federal judges have a lot of discretion. There are no mandatory minimums in this case. And they can say, or excuse me, there's no mandatory sentencing in this case. And so they can say, look, we think that this is an appropriate sentence. And they can hear from the victims again. So federal judges have really broad discretion when it comes to giving down these sentences. But look, let's be honest, Ghislaine Maxwell faces years, if not decades, in federal prison.
And Jericka, back over to you. How many victims came forward and actually offered testimony in this trial?
You know, this trial really centered around the 4, but as we know, and we've even spoke to on several of our different platforms, whether it was CBS Morning, CBSN, CBS Evening News, a number of people, almost too many to count when you look at the vast range from, you know, specifically with that first count, it had to do with a woman named Carolyn in this case. And those accusations go back from 2001 to 2004. So this is decades in the making, and a number of people, like I said, breathing a sigh of relief, feeling as though they've been vindicated, even though this case centered around these 4 women.
Jessica, first it was Jeffrey Epstein, who you see there, now Ghislaine Maxwell. Are there more people expected to be tried for their potential involvement in this sex trafficking ring?
Well, we don't know. I think these were the key players in this case. And of course, as we just mentioned, Ghislaine Maxwell really saying, you're only trying me because Epstein is dead, because there's nobody else to try. It is worth noting that I believe Ghislaine Maxwell also faces perjury charges. So she's facing another trial coming up. Not clear that anybody else involved in this particular, now we can call it criminal enterprise, will be charged. I know that there, I believe, is a hearing with respect to Prince Andrew next week, somewhat, I guess, peripherally related to this. But in this case, I think what Jericka said is so important, which is there were 4 women who came forward in this particular case to talk about the criminal enterprise. And there were a lot of other women who came forward kind of outside the courtroom. And so I think what comes next for these particular players can also be additional civil charges, which obviously in a case of civil charges, all that you have is money. And we know that this was part of the defense's strategy here, where they said, well, these women really just want to get some money from this basically fund that goes to survivors of Epstein's abuses. And we know that ultimately the jury really didn't give credence. We know today, thanks to the verdict, that the jury really ultimately didn't give credence to the idea that these women were motivated by money or faulty memories, as opposed to motivated by justice.
All right, Ghislaine Maxwell found guilty of 5 of the 6 counts she faced in this sex trafficking ring. Jessica Levinson and Jericka Duncan, we want to thank you so much. We're going to take a quick break here, but we will be right back with the rest of the day's news. You're streaming CBSN, CBS News, always on.
Welcome to CBS Mornings.
Up next, stories you'll be talking about today. That's a big deal.
People stop me on the street and say, I always learn something new every day when I watch your show.
This morning, we're going to begin with some good news.
Oh, you just put me in a good mood.
Just follow me. I'll lead the way.
There's always something new under the sun. CBS Mornings, weekdays on CBS.
An original documentary on CBSN.
We need to put an end to this territorial status.
Will statehood create a better Puerto Rico?
So that we have the same quality of life that you see in the States.
What do you worry about?
Me living here in the future.
They're giving incentives to non-Puerto Ricans to come to Puerto Rico
and extract our natural resources and take over our land.
Vacation in Puerto Rico, and in exchange for that, you don't pay taxes.
Why would I allow somebody who abused me for 123 years to then consume me?
an originals documentary on CBSN. Stream now.
If it's important to our nation,
the country is facing yet another unprecedented crisis.
It's on Face the Nation.
You heard the president. Where do you think this stalemate goes from here?
Making politics make sense.
What do you think happened here?
The why behind the biggest stories. Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS.
An original documentary on CBSN.
50 shows running, the lights blinking.
People fight their entire career to get to Broadway.
You've trained your entire life.
Spotlights, drama, passion.
This is what we live for.
Until COVID turned off the lights.
It's like going from a bright light to pitch black.
Scenes from Broadway's unique struggle with COVID.
It was devastating.
Broadway contributes about $15 billion to New York City's economy and 100,000 jobs.
The sound team, the lighting team, everyone.
The world does not realize how big this is.
This is how we make money.
This is a specialized industry. You don't tell a doctor to go get a serving job. Why are we different?
Are we going to be able to pay our rent? Am I going to have food?
What will happen in Broadway's new opening act?
We're in uncharted waters again.
The show must go on.
There is reason to hope again.
I think people are going to be crying. I know I will.
An originals documentary on CBSN. Stream now.
Everything was on fire.
You're left making decisions you don't want to make.
If we're at war at fire, we're going to spend a lot of money, we're going to take a lot of casualties, and we're going to lose.
We got to do something about it.
President Biden is set to hold a phone conversation with Russian President Vladimir Putin Thursday. According to a White House official, Mr. Putin requested the call. The Biden administration says the two leaders will discuss a range of topics, including upcoming diplomatic engagements. This will be the second direct contact between the two this month. One likely talking point is the Russian buildup of troops near the Ukrainian border, which has sparked fear of a possible invasion. Moscow denies this is its goal. The U.S. has warned Russia of severe consequences